Curses and the Covenants, A History Weaver Mystery, Book 2, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 15. I was soon able to form my own first-hand impression of Mrs. Fairchild. We'd only spoken on the phone to cancel Julia's sessions, but she stopped by the office in person the next week. She smiled brightly as she introduced herself as Tamara, but her smile looked a little brittle. I sensed a layer of discomfort under the classy exterior. The family stress certainly wasn't coming out in her looks. She looked even more perfectly pulled together than when I had seen her in the distance. From her sky-blue eyes she was probably naturally fair, but the shade of blonde she was sporting was surely not her own natural one. Adults were very seldom so light-haired. However, the color was so well chosen it complemented her complexion beautifully, and there was not a hint of a root to be seen. With her height and build, I wondered if she'd modeled in her younger years. She certainly didn't look old enough to be the mother of 2 teenagers. "I'm sorry we haven't met yet. I was meaning to ask you over for dinner to meet the whole family, but it's been hectic since school started. Would you be available to come Tuesday for dinner? We're having a few other people around. Nothing big, but it would be a way for you to meet a few other people. I believe you're new to Beaver Row?" Tamara said. "Well, sort of. I was born and raised here, but I've been away quite a while, so that would be nice, thank you. Yes, I'm free Tuesday evening." It was one of my usual evenings for dinner with Ma, but that could keep. I was very curious to get a first-hand look at the Fairchild family and draw my own conclusions. Not that they would matter, but just for my own satisfaction, I wanted to meet them. I did find it odd to be extended a social invitation from the Fairchilds in light of what they were going through with Julia, but I was sure they had their reasons. "That's excellent," she said, and gave me her address and directions to find their house. Mallard Avenue, one of the nicely refinished old homes of Beaver Row, no doubt. Then she continued, "And I wanted to tell you that we don't hold you personally responsible for the situation. We know you were just doing your job. As you can imagine, it's been a stressful time for us. But to be honest," she sighed, "it's always a stressful time with Julia, and she seems to have clicked with you. She's been asking when you'll start meeting again, so we think maybe it would be good for all of us if she had someone to confide in. We'd like you to get back into meeting with her again next week, if that's okay with you." "Yes, I'd be happy to," I said. I wouldn't be happy to, exactly, but that's what one was expected to say. I was beyond surprised to hear that Julia's mother thought Julia had connected with me. I wouldn't have called it that. And had Julia really been asking to meet with me again, or was it a useful fiction for some plan of Tamara's? Why was I always so suspicious of everyone? I scolded myself. Was I so devious that I always looked for the same trait in other people? I didn't think so. I was just a natural cynic, I supposed. But if I would be able to help the troubled girl in any way, I would try. I just doubted my own abilities there. Tamara leaned forward across my desk and lowered her voice. "I should tell you, because I think it will be relevant in your sessions, that Julia is on antipsychotics." "Meds? For?" "She was diagnosed with schizophrenia last year. She'd been on antidepressants for longer. They only recently discovered that she's schizophrenic." "Oh, I see. Yes, that does seem like pertinent information. Thanks for telling me." Doctor's child. I suppose it wasn't surprising the solution had been to medicate her behavior. But I was puzzled by the diagnosis of schizophrenia. It seemed Tamara was implying that Julia's lack of truthfulness could be coming from the delusions of schizophrenia. I was no expert, but I'd believed that schizophrenic delusions were more obviously out of touch with reality. The things Julia had been claiming weren't along the lines of aliens communicating to her through the fillings in her teeth, as I had somehow tucked away in the back of my brain from somewhere or other for my only reference to schizophrenic delusions, probably something I'd read. But it wasn't up to me to question the diagnosis. Maybe she had shown signs of psychotic delusions in other instances, and the stories she was fabricating at present, assuming she was, and their ever-changing nature said they were fabrications, were a different issue. Just because a person has schizophrenia didn't mean she couldn't also be a pathological liar. Or maybe schizophrenia manifested differently in different people. Or maybe the meds were controlling the schizophrenia, but had no effect on a moral issue like lying. Regardless, there was a lot to think about, and I didn't know what to think. The dinner party on Tuesday was more of an event than I'd anticipated. I hadn't known how to dress for the occasion, so I'd opted for a nice pair of jeans and a dressier top. The other women were in dresses, so I felt a little underdressed. Since when did people in Beaver Row dress up for dinner at a friend's? Since the dinner was at a doctor's house, I suppose. My heart sank. These were not going to be my type of people. But everyone was cordial and less formal in manner than in dress, and my nerves soon relaxed with a glass of wine in my hand. I'd already created a mental persona for the doctor before I'd met him. I'd subconsciously cast him as the villain of the piece. I didn't know what I believed about Julia's allegations. Still, I'd imagined the doctor as jovial, but only as a front, with an edge of something sinister beneath the false heartiness. Instead, Dr. Fairchild was friendly, though quieter than I expected, with an air of calm. There didn't seem to be a hint of insincerity that I could pick up. He seemed perfectly relaxed, even warm, with his family and every guest. If he corrected George or Julia, he spoke to them in a low tone that got the point across, but didn't seem menacing. And he and his wife seemed on very good terms, in an unostentatious kind of way, just very comfortable with each other. In fact, the slight undercurrent of anxiety I felt from her in my office seemed habitual. I noticed it when she spoke to anyone besides her husband. He was the only person she seemed at ease with. I think she's just naturally shy and works hard not to be, I told myself. The doctor had the good looks I expected him to have, to go along with the false front of joviality. The good looks were there, but the false front of joviality seemed to be missing. He looked older than his wife, but not enough to make them a mismatch, and maybe she hid her age well. Very fit and tanned, a square jaw full of white, even teeth that showed often in an engaging smile, a well-trimmed graying beard, short fair hair graying around the temples, and gray-blue eyes that crinkled at the corners pleasantly. I'm always prepared to be prejudiced either for or against anyone too good-looking, but without discovering any trace of insincerity, I couldn't hold the good looks against him. They weren't enough to sway my opinion negatively all on their own. I'd been telling myself not to place any more weight on my first impressions than I had on my imaginary persona before the first impressions, but I couldn't help trusting my instincts. I could no longer cast the doctor for the role of villain. If this was acting, he was in the wrong career. No matter how good he was as a doctor, he was better as an actor, if he wasn't really who he seemed to be. No, I was convinced I was seeing the genuine article. George was a younger version of his dad without the gray and the beard, and he also carried the same energy. Both he and Julia were well behaved around the company, but Julia's good behavior was sullen. George was more interactive with the guests when appropriate, and he had the same air of calm relaxation I'd instantly noticed in his dad. His politeness seemed second nature to him. I could see why Edie Gallant had called him a nice kid. I had a mini internal tremor at the thought of what Julia was dragging this nice boy and his nice father through. Hopefully the truth would come out quickly, whatever it was, with the bare minimum of damage done. I reminded myself that anyone could be fooled. The least likely people were capable of truly terrible things. But I knew I'd simply be unable to believe the worst of George and his dad until, and unless, very hard evidence was presented to me. It looked like I'd made my mind up until further notice. Julia was lying. At least about these two.